Cecily of York. For most people, that name brings to mind the jealous and calculating sister of Queen Elizabeth, the way she was shown in The White Princess. But the real Cecily story is nothing like the one we were shown on screen. Today, I want to tell you about a woman who could have been a queen, but instead ended her life in poverty and exile, sacrificing everything for love. Cecily of York was born on March 20th, 1469, and became the third child of King Edward IV and Elizabeth Woodville, or more precisely, their third daughter. And even though the birth of a healthy and beautiful baby, as she was described at the time, was a joyful occasion, it was hard for anyone at court to hide their disappointment. A young king and a young dynasty needed sons, and daughters were seen as far less valuable. She was named after her grandmother, Cecily Neville, the matriarch of the York family. I actually made a video about her just last week, so make sure to check it out if you missed it. And it seems to me that, first of all, this was a kind of gesture from Elizabeth Woodville toward her mother-in-law, a name that promised the girl the same strength and influence her grandmother had. The first years of Cecily's life fell during one of the most difficult periods for her family. Her own Uncle George was trying to overthrow her father, and most likely, as a 1-year-old child, she didn't remember that atmosphere of fear and uncertainty, or how they hid with their mother in Westminster Abbey. But, by a tragic irony of fate, this place would be tied to many more dark moments in her personal story and in the history of her family. But her father did manage to hold on to the crown, and Cecily still had the childhood of a true princess, closely tied to that of her sister Elizabeth and their sister Mary. In total, there were 6 girls in the family, but it was the 3 eldest, born close together in age, who were likely given special attention as the first children of Elizabeth Woodville, who was deeply involved in their education. Interestingly, the 3 younger daughters, who were born later and grew up after their father's death, did not receive the same level of education as the older sisters. However, it seems that Cecily herself was not the most diligent student. When historians later analysed her handwriting and surviving records, they noticed that she did not write particularly well and made quite a lot of spelling mistakes, something Elizabeth, for example, was not prone to. It's unclear whether this was due to a lack of skill or simply because more attention was given to Elizabeth's education. Even so, literacy was valued in the York family. Edward IV collected manuscripts, and the family owned several books, some of which were even signed with Cecily's name. But even if girls in royal families were valued less and were not as well educated as boys, when it came to marriage, they were still a very valuable asset. Both Elizabeth and Cecily had crowns prepared for them, although, to jump ahead a little, neither of them would ever actually wear them. At the age of 5, Cecily was betrothed to the son of James III of Scotland. An official engagement ceremony took place in Edinburgh, and from that moment on, she carried the title of Princess of Scotland. And here's a small spoiler again, that same son of James would later become the husband of Henry VIII's sister, Margaret Tudor. Just so you understand who we're talking about, and also to give you a sense of how incredibly small the marriage market of that time really was. If this were Tinder, the swipes would have run out after about 3 tries. At the same time, a suitable match was arranged for her older sister, Elizabeth. Her future husband was supposed to be the Dauphin of France, the future King Charles VIII, and at court, Elizabeth was already being called Madame la Dauphine and was being taught French. So, just imagine how differently the story and the fate of these girls might have unfolded if their parents' plans had actually come true. However, when Cecily turned 12, an age considered suitable for marriage, James III began pressuring her father to send her north. This did not sit well with the English king at all. Edward believed that his Scottish neighbour was only interested in securing his daughter's dowry. Tensions rose, and in the end, the engagement was broken off. Just one step away from a crown, Cecily lost it. Her father began searching for a new alliance for his daughter, even considering a match with Alexander Stuart, Duke of Albany, the exiled younger brother of James III. But he never managed to make any final decisions, because shortly after the Easter celebrations in April 1483, he died, leaving his children and his wife under the protection of what he believed to be his loyal brother, Richard, when, in reality, everything was about to fall apart. Cesaly's uncle, the Duke of Gloucester, seized power and became King Richard III. Her parents' marriage was declared invalid, and Cecily and her brothers and sisters were proclaimed illegitimate. Cecily, once again, found herself in refuge within the walls of Westminster Abbey. But this time, she was no longer a small child who didn't understand what was happening. She was already a young woman, feeling her mother's fear, seeing her stripped of her sons, and beginning to sense the uncertain outline of her own future. Elizabeth Woodville came up with a plan. One of her eldest daughters, either Elizabeth or Cecily, was to escape abroad in order to gather foreign supporters and try to rescue Edward V and Richard of York from the Tower. And if the princes could not be saved, then this princess, with the backing of foreign allies, would claim her right to the throne. But this plan was revealed to Richard of Gloucester by someone described as a traitor from the Queen's camp, and the guards were ordered not to let any of the girls leave Westminster. Which is honestly a shame, because it seems to me that if any of the sisters had been capable of taking on something that dangerous, it would have been Cecily. Her later life will show that she was definitely not one to shy away from risk. Elizabeth Woodville then made another decision. She struck a deal with Margaret Beaufort to marry her daughter Elizabeth to Margaret's son, Henry Tudor. But Cecily's name was also considered as a second possible bride for the future claimant to the throne. This was quite a common practice, just in case Elizabeth suddenly died or something unexpected happened. On Christmas Day in 1483, Henry Tudor swore an oath in Rennes Cathedral that he would marry one of Edward IV's daughters when he took the English throne. At the same time, Richard III had his own plans for his nieces. He promised their mother that they would be placed in respectable places of good name and reputation. I honestly don't know how Elizabeth Woodville could still trust him after everything that had happened. And as soon as the York princesses left sanctuary, Richard began looking for husbands for them. This was most likely part of his plan, to marry off the York women to men who were useful to him, and in Cecily's case, it was also a way to neutralise her, to take her out of the game. Because if Henry Tudor did manage to take the throne, that would mean one less potential bride for him. As a husband for the princess, Ralph Scrope of Upsall was chosen, the second son of a minor nobleman. And you have to admit, there is quite a difference between marrying the son of a king and marrying a man who stands so much lower than you in status. But this unequal marriage, arranged at the beginning of 1485, was not destined to last even a year. In August, Richard was killed and Henry VII took the throne. Since Elizabeth was still unmarried, she was naturally chosen as the bride, being the elder sister. But Cecily was restored to legitimacy and her marriage was quickly annulled, giving her freedom again and opening up new prospects on the marriage market. By the way, in The White Queen, there's a scene where Cecily desperately throws herself at Henry and practically runs into his bedchamber. But in reality, there is no evidence that Cecily ever tried to seduce him. As always, just a small touch of drama. During her sister's reign, Cecily received great respect and all the highest honours. She rode in the carriage behind Elizabeth at her coronation, she carried her train, and she even held Prince Arthur at his christening. In the series, Cecily does all of this as if she is jealous of her sister, of the role that could have been hers. But I don't think that was really the case, because the rules of this game and the conditions of it were clear to everyone involved long before. Yes, it's possible that Cecily felt that the crown she could have worn twice in her life was slipping away from her, but there is no evidence that she was ever a jealous sister. And here is where the series does not completely mislead you. Cecily really did have a close relationship with Margaret Beaufort. In the show, she spies on her sister for her, but in reality, first of all, Margaret had long been part of their family circle and was involved in raising the girls when they were still children, so their relationship likely began much earlier. Margaret supported Cecily for the rest of her life and acted as her protector before the king. And by the way, it was Margaret who chose Cecily's second husband, her own half-brother, John, Viscount Wells, which, if you think about it, was quite a significant gesture of favour, and, of course, also part of the Tudor marriage game. There was now a new dynasty on the throne, and that meant the princesses were expected to strengthen new political alliances through marriage. Even though the groom was almost 20 years older than the bride, if you look at the number of estates he granted to his young wife, it gives the impression that the marriage worked. And after his death, Cecily arranged a very elaborate funeral for him, which some historians interpret as a sign of her love and respect for her husband. They had 2 children, 2 daughters, who unfortunately did not live long. And they lived away from court, so we know very little about this period of Cecily's life. Her return to London was connected to her widowhood. When her husband died, she was 30 years old, and she came back to her sister's court, immediately finding herself right in the middle of events. First of all, it was Cecily who carried the train of Catherine of Aragon's dress at her wedding to Arthur, Prince of Wales, and during the celebrations, she even danced twice with her nephew. Contemporaries were struck by Cecily's fashionable outfits, and there are even accounts saying that she looked more like a bride than a widow. She also witnessed the arrival of Scottish envoys who came to arrange the marriage of her niece, Margaret Tudor, to James IV, Cecily's former fiancé. It must have been a rather strange twist of fate that the man who was once meant to be her husband would later become the husband of her niece. Cecily herself, by the way, was no longer considered for such a role. By the standards of the time, at 30, she was already seen as quite old. Although, even if diplomats thought so, she clearly did not. She decided that it was finally time to take her love and her happiness into her own hands, and chose a husband for herself. In 1502, Cecily married Sir Thomas Kyme, a man far below her in status, whose origins are barely known, although he was most likely a Lincolnshire squire. According to the historian Mary Ann Everett Green, the English royal family had never known such an unequal union. And here I will allow myself to disagree, because my previous video was actually about royal women who married beneath their rank of their own free will, so she was not exactly a pioneer. For example, her own grandmother, Jacquetta of Luxembourg, who married the simple knight Richard Woodville, even though she had been the widow of the king's brother. So, in many ways, the story of this family is a story of love against all odds, and Cecily simply continued that tradition. But, like her grandmother, she also did not ask for the king's permission, which, of course, provoked Henry VII's anger. He banished her from court and stripped her of the income from the Wells estate that she held as a widow, which, of course, was a serious blow, especially considering that Cecily's husband was not a wealthy man, or at least not wealthy enough to maintain a princess with such extravagant tastes. Cecily was not even allowed to attend the funeral of her own sister, who died a year later. So great was the king's anger. But she did have a protector at court, Margaret Beaufort. She offered the couple shelter at one of her estates and helped them reach a financial agreement with the king. Although the 2 children born from this marriage were not recognised by the royal family and did not receive any titles, Cecily still managed to regain part of her lands and live with some dignity, far from the turbulent and ever-changing English court to which so much of her life had been tied. Cecily outlived her crowned sister by only 4 years and died on August 24th, 1507, at the age of 38. Her funeral was paid for by Margaret Beaufort, and Henry VII forbade the name of her 3rd husband from being recorded in official documents, ordering that Cecily be buried as the late wife of the late John, Viscount Wells. However, the exact place of Cecily's burial remains unknown. Several possible locations have been suggested, but none have been confirmed. So, if you were to try and visit Cecily today and bring her flowers in memory, there would simply be nowhere to go. And so, the second White Princess of York faded into history, almost completely forgotten. Cecily of York is a strange figure in the story of the York dynasty. On the one hand, a woman who had a crown prepared for her, and who could have worn it twice in her life, and yet never did, ultimately remaining on the margins of history, always in the shadow of her sister. But maybe this video helped, at least a little, to bring Cecily out of that shadow in your eyes, and to show that behind the fiction of the White Princess there was, in reality, a rebellious woman, ready to risk everything for love, and at the same time, a victim of her harsh era. What do you think about how the series portrayed Cecily? And which woman should we talk about in the next video? Write in the comments, share your royal likes generously, and I'll see you in the next videos.